Hi there, we're reading From Hand to Mouth, or How We Invented Knives, Forks, Spoons, and Chopsticks, and the Table Manners to Go With Them by James Cross Giblin. We're on Chapter 2, Ancient Spoons and Knives. A family has gathered for their evening meal in the courtyard of their mud brick house. The house is one of several hundred in a village on the shores of the eastern Mediterranean Sea in what is today Israel. Although it is almost 5,000 years ago, people are already living in settled communities, raising crops each year, making pottery, and tending flocks of cattle, sheep, and goats. The mother of the family puts a steaming pot of soup on a low wooden table and ladles it into individual clay bowls. She serves the father first, then the grandfather and grandmother, and finally the 4 children and herself. The soup smells delicious. It is thickened with barley and contains onions, carrots, and chunks of baby lamb. The family members lift their bowls and eagerly dip into the soup with spoons made from seashells. Historians agree that the spoon is our oldest eating utensil. Only the knife is an older implement, and as we have seen, it was not developed originally for eating. Ancient peoples probably got the idea for spoons from the shells of clams and mussels that they picked up along the banks of rivers and the shores of lakes and oceans. Some of the shells could be used as found, but most of them had to be polished and shaped. Every spoon consists of 2 parts, the bowl, which contains the solid or liquid food, and the stem or handle, which the diner grips. The shells of a sea creature, the cowrie, form the bowls of some spoons dating back from 1500 BCE that have been unearthed in Egypt. The shells were mounted on stems of wood or bone. The family portrayed in the opening scene of this chapter ate with similar spoons, and they were common throughout the ancient Middle East. Other early spoons were carved from wood. One of the oldest, found at a burial site near Lucerne, Switzerland, was made from between 3000 and 2500 BC. It's interesting to note that our word spoon comes from the Anglo-Saxon word spawn, which meant a chip or splinter of wood. This seems to indicate that most of the spoons used by the ancient peoples of northern Europe were wooden. Another favorite material of early spoon makers was horn. The curved horns of sheep or goats made excellent oval-shaped spoons when they were properly cut and fastened to a stem of wood, bone, or another piece of horn. Larger animal horns could be softened by boiling and then pressed into the shape of spoons, with the stem and bowl in one piece. Examples of both types of horn spoons, dating back to 2000 BC and earlier, have been found in Turkey and other countries. While people were eating with spoons made of shell, wood, or horn, they were still cutting their food with flint knives. Here's a picture, courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, of flint knives from prehistoric Egypt. These were similar to the knives their Stone Age ancestors had used thousands of years before. Flint is a kind of stone that is harder than many metals. It was formed more than 100 million years ago when sponges with glassy skeletons thrived at the bottom of the seas that covered much of what is now Western Europe. As the earth rose and the seas retreated, enormous pressure solidified the sponge skeletons into layers of flint. Prehistoric people found pieces of flint on the Earth's surface and saw that the fresh edges were very sharp. They learned how to chip, grind, and polish the flint into even sharper and more efficient spear points and knives. Later, they discovered that the best flint for making knives and other tools came from deep underground. They dug mines to obtain it, and a brisk trade in high-quality flint developed in the ancient world. From Western Europe to the Middle East, people hunted, cooked, and ate with knives made of flint. The Egyptians sometimes carved wooden knives with a slot into which they glued a cutting edge of flint. Other Egyptian flint knives had elaborately decorated handles of bone or ivory. Many examples of flint knives can still be seen in museums, but few ancient spoons made of shell, wood, or horn have survived. Most of those spoons have long since rotted or crumbled into dust. It wasn't until people learned to work with copper and other metals that they were able to fashion spoons and other utensils that would last, not just for a lifetime, but for centuries. Perhaps people first discovered metallic ores when hot fires melted out of the hearthstones that were in almost constant use for heating and cooking. However it happened, we know that as far back as 9000 BC, people in what is now Turkey were extracting copper from its ore by heating or smelting. They shaped the copper into bowls, ornaments, and weapons. Sometime later, people in the Middle East and Asia learned how to make a much harder metal, bronze, by heating copper and tin until they melted and mixed together. When the molten metal cooled and hardened, bronze was formed. Here's some pictures of Egyptian bronze knives with wooden handles from the 18th dynasty, from 1570 to 1342 BC, courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Ancient metal workers produced knives of bronze by pouring the hot liquid metal into clay or stone molds and letting it set. This process is known as casting, and the knife and sword molds found in the Middle East reveal that it was being practiced as early as 3500 BC. While bronze was a more versatile metal than copper, it had its limitations. For one thing, the materials necessary for its manufacture, especially tin, were quite scarce in the ancient world. Iron ore was much more common, but for a long time, people didn't know how to make it into good, strong iron. Then about 1400 BC, the Hittites, a people who lived in what is now Syria, invented the process known as forging. In this process, iron ore was heated again and again and hammered into the desired shape. Then it was plunged into cold water. This hardened metal, enabling knife makers to give it a clean, durable cutting edge. Here's a picture of ancient Egyptian spoons made of bronze, also courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The Hittites tried to keep their ironworking techniques a secret so that they could retain a monopoly on the manufacture of high-quality swords, daggers, and knives. But after the downfall of the Hittite Empire in 1200 BC, knowledge of iron technology spread quickly throughout the Middle East and southern Europe. As metal workers experimented with iron, they discovered that it could be strengthened even if it was mixed or alloyed with carbon and other elements. The workers put the iron and carbon into a container called a crucible and heated them at very high temperatures until they melted and fused together. The result was steel. Swords and knives made of steel were extremely strong and extremely sharp. In fact, the Spartans, who lived in ancient Greece, are said to have owed their success in war to the steel swords they began carrying into battle around 650 BC. Although bronze, iron, and steel were probably employed first in the manufacture of weapons, they were soon put to more peaceful uses. Jewelry, mirrors, pots, and kitchen knives were all made from the new metals, and so were spoons. Starting about 1000 BC, the Egyptians produced small round bronze spoons with a sharp point at the end of the stems. Perhaps a diner turned the spoon around or used the point to spear pieces of meat or fish. Or perhaps he extracted snails from their shells with it. No one today knows for sure. Ancient spoons were usually shaped by casting. This could be done either in a permanent mold of stone or a temporary one made of clay. When a stone mold was used, molten bronze or iron was poured into it and allowed to set. Then the two parts of the mold were separated and the spoon was removed. Making a spoon in a temporary mold was more complicated. First, the design of the spoon was molded carefully in wax. Then the wax model was embedded in damp clay with a small hole left at one end. After the clay block dried and hardened, it was heated to a high temperature. The wax ran out and molten metal replaced in the clay mold. When the metal had cooled and set, the mold was chipped away. This process, called the lost wax method, is still used in the manufacture of some spoons today. It is slow and expensive because a new wax pattern has to be created for each spoon. But the bowl of the spoon can be cast very thin in the lost wax method, and the stem can be given extra fine detailing. The Romans, whose empire was at its peak at the time of Christ, used both methods of casting to make their bronze and silver spoons. Two basic types of Roman spoons have been found in the ruins of Pompeii and in other ancient towns and cities. One, with a round bowl and a long, thin stem ending in a point, bears a strong resemblance to early Egyptian spoons. Its purpose is made clear in a Roman wall painting that shows such a spoon resting across a bowl of eggs. According to a Roman superstition, evil spirits often lurked inside fresh eggs. Many Romans believed that before they cracked open and ate an egg, they should pierce the shell so the evil spirits could escape. The sharp point at the end of the first type of spoon was perfectly designed to do this. The other type of Roman spoon, called the ligula, looked much like our modern spoons. It had an oval bowl and a narrow rounded stem that often ended in decoration. The stems of some ligulas were also inscribed with sayings such as, "Use me with happiness," "Live well," and "Live to conquer." I want spoons like that. The last one probably appeared on a spoon made for an army officer. The Romans observed an elaborate set of table manners throughout their vast empire, which stretched from Britain in the west to Central Asia in the east. They loved grand banquets with many courses. Between courses, they washed their hands in silver finger bowls and wiped them on linen napkins. Here's a picture of Roman spoons of gold and silver in the ligula style. Note the decoration in the form of a duck head and bill at the ends of the stems. I don't quite see it. See if you notice it. The end of the stem. So the very end of the handle there, you'll see the shape of a duck head if you use your imagination. So anyway, that's courtesy of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Look carefully there. There's one. You see those duck heads they're talking about? I think it's a bit of a stretch, but if they say so, they must know what they're talking about. A Roman banquet scene is imagined by a 19th century illustrator, courtesy of the Kubler Picture Collection, Cooper Hewitt Museum, Smithsonian Institution Art Resource. All that came to an end with the collapse of the Roman Empire in Western Europe in AD 476. In some parts of Europe, the use of eating utensils and the state of table manners fell back to an almost prehistoric level, and they remained on that level for hundreds of years. How interesting. Well, next time we'll read chapter 3. Don't put your hand in the pot, your whole hand. Don't put your whole hand in the pot. We'll see what that's about next time.